Hello. Hello, police. Yeah, what's the problem, sir? We just drove down our farm track. Yeah. Go and feed our pheasants. We come across a Range Rover with 3 people in it. Yeah. It appears that they're dead. I don't know what's happening. Blood in the motor all over them.
And welcome back to a new video on the Essex Boys case. As always, if you are enjoying the content, please do give the video a thumbs up. And if you're interested in the Essex Boys case, or simply true crime in general, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. Had the frost not been quite so severe that morning, so severe as to render it impossible to mix mortar, then Ken Jiggins would have simply gone to work. As it was, the amiable bricklayer decided to start the day by helping his friend Peter Theobald feed the 800 pheasants he kept at White House Farm in Rettendon. Jiggins arrived just after 8 AM, and eager to get the job done, the pair decided to skip tea and headed straight for Theobald's Land Rover. It had snowed during the night, and there was a thick layer of ice on the car's windscreen and windows, which the two men diligently scraped off before driving across the field and then turning left into Workhouse Lane. As they neared the bottom, they found their path blocked by a metallic blue Range Rover, parked in front of the locked gate that leads to the fishing pond. Inside, Jiggins and Theobald could clearly see the silhouettes of 2 men in the front seats. Their first thought was that they must be asleep, so Jiggins jumped out to ask them to move out the way. I tapped on the driver's window, looked in and saw the driver lying with his head on one side. There was blood coming from his nose, mouth and on his chest, says Jiggins. The passenger sat with his head slumped forward and blood on his chest. Theobald was still in the car, worrying that the men might be poachers and turn nasty, when Jiggins called out to him. "There's 2 dead men here!" As the pair nervously dialed the police on Theobald's mobile phone, they noticed a 3rd body in the back with more blood and gore spilling out from its head and a gaping wound in its belly. Detective Superintendent Ivan Dibley had been with Essex Police for 31 years since the tender age of 17. He was just 4 months away from retirement and getting ready to enjoy a rare day off when just after 8:30 AM the call came asking him if he'd like to come in and take charge of what would undoubtedly be the biggest case of his entire career. Although he was officially on leave that day, the killing had occurred on his designated patch, so through polite protocol a colleague phoned to offer him first bite of the cherry. Dibley had a first-class record when it came to murder. Of the 25 homicides he had investigated, only 2 had remained unsolved. He also took any gangland murder on his patch as a personal challenge, as if someone was throwing down a gauntlet and saying, "I bet you can't catch me." I said yes, but on one condition. I'd promised my daughter that I'd changed an electrical fitting at her house and I wanted to do that first. The only information I had was that there are 3 men dead in a Range Rover, so I knew a pathologist would have been called to the scene, and that the inquiry wasn't going to take any real steps for at least several hours. His chores done, Dibley made his way to the scene of the crime and was immediately disturbed by what he saw around him. The first thing you do when you're investigating a murder scene is look around for things that may help you. As I was walking down the lane, I looked around and there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. No houses overlooking the scene, not even any houses close enough to consider house-to-house inquiries. There was a slight covering of snow on the ground, but that was melting before my very eyes and taking any footprint evidence with it. The further I got down the lane, the more isolated I realised it was. There was no chance of a live witness having seen anything or even having heard anything. My first thought was, Christ, where do we start? At that stage, Dibley didn't even know who the men were. Despite the dinner arrangements that had been put in place the previous evening, the girlfriends of Tate, Tucker and Rolfe saw no cause for alarm. They were well used to their men vanishing at short notice, sometimes for days at a time. Besides, phoning the police to report them missing so quickly would have done nothing to ingratiate themselves had they turned up later on. The car gave no clues either. The man in whose name the vehicle was registered was found to be alive and well, but could throw little light on the occupants, having sold it on some months before. However, the police records did show that a local officer had run a check on the same vehicle the previous day. When he was tracked down, he explained he'd seen the vehicle being driven by a well-known face, and had pulled him over to check whose vehicle it was. The face was Craig Rolfe, and Dibley had his first name. But it was only when local news bulletins about 3 men being executed in a Range Rover started airing around the middle of the day that Donna Jaggers and the other relatives sensed that something might be wrong. About this time, Tony Tucker's mobile phone began to ring. "We've just heard that there's 3 men who have been found dead in a Range Rover. We think one of them is you." As the names slowly started to filter in, so the manner of the execution began to make more sense, especially when it came to one of the dead men in particular. "I'd actually met Tate before," says Dibley. "I was working as a DI in Brentwood at the time, and there'd been a number of armed robberies that Tate was rumoured to be involved in." Before we could do anything, he'd escaped from the magistrate's court, run off to Spain, been brought back and banged up on some other charges. But I was still keen to try and clear these crimes up, so I went on a cold visit to Swaleside Prison to see if I could persuade him to admit to some of the unsolved cases. So I'm waiting in this interview room and the prison officers have gone over to call him over. As it's a cold visit, he has no idea who I am or why I'm there. And I'm looking at this 6'4" doorway, waiting for him to turn up. And when he does, he fills the doorway completely. I've never seen such a big man in my whole life. He actually took all the light away from the room. That's how big he was. His arms, chest, everything was just enormous. He sat down and I said, "Hello, Mr. Tate. You don't know me, but I'm investigating some armed robberies." And then for the next 20 minutes, I talked and talked and talked. I was going on about what I suspected that he had done and saying that the only way he'd get parole for his current sentence would be if he came clean about everything. The whole time he just sat and stared at me. He didn't say a word. Then after 20 minutes, he got up and walked out of the room. The next time I saw him, he was dead. By the end of the first day, the identities of all 3 men had been firmly established and the grim task of informing the next of kin was well underway. For some, the news was simply too much to bear. Tony Tucker's 63-year-old father Ronald was at home in Folkestone, Kent when he found out. Ronald had seen the news bulletins about the brutal killing, but had never believed for 1 second that his precious son could have been involved. Within seconds of finding out, he had a massive heart attack and dropped dead on the spot. The following morning, local and national newspapers started running stories about the backgrounds of the 3 dead men and speculating about what was going on. The Essex Police press office was besieged with calls from hacks who wanted to know if this was going to be the start of a massive gangland war in the country, if the dead men had been armed, how many shots had been fired, and most of all, if anyone had been arrested. The police were saying nothing, but there was so much background to write about they didn't need to. There was the link to Leah Betts, the attack on the pizza parlour man, the previous attempt on Tate's life, and even a celebrity angle thanks to Tucker's friendship with Nigel Benn. That afternoon, Dibley held a press conference where he answered a few questions, then produced Donna Jaggers to make a direct, emotional appeal. An attempt to humanise the 3 men who were already being typecast as mindless thugs. Weeping uncontrollably, Jaggers proved at least someone cared about them. "I would just like anyone who was with them, who knows anything about what happened to them, or if anyone saw anything to just come forward. We need all the help we can get." Dibley couldn't have put it better himself. Earlier in the day, he had received a report from his forensics team. Dozens of fingerprints had been lifted from the interior of the Range Rover, but they had all belonged to Tate, Tucker or Rolfe. A few fibres had been recovered, but with no control samples for comparison, they were worthless. You've been listening to Blogs 19, written by Tony Thompson. This book is available to purchase online at Amazon and other online book retailers. Many thanks for joining me for this video. Very shortly you'll be able to see some other videos from the channel, including the Essex Boys playlist, which has all of the videos concerning this case in one convenient folder. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. I look forward to seeing you all again in the next video. Take care. Cheers.